So for those of all who are here, welcome. And those of you who are watching later on, welcome. Um, so welcome to our session. This is a TLC virtual track session, um, writing and using teaching case studies. And so we have four presenters here today. And so Misty Sharp from University of Florida, Hannah Shear from Oklahoma State University, Maria Bompasadou from Texas A&M now, and I'm Dr. Jason Berchtold from Kansas State University. So we're going to walk through and really look at what are case studies and how can we incorporate them, use them, write them, and publish them in our profession. So I'm going to turn it over to Misty, and she's going to start us off with preparing organizational leaders in agriculture, considering non-pecuniary matters and economic case studies.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, so as he mentioned, I'm Misty. I'm from the University of Florida, if you can't tell by the branding here on my slide. And I wanted to share a bit about how I wrote a case study that incorporated things that were not AggieCon into the case. And so I'll start by giving you a little bit of background about myself and my motivations for a case study that I wrote, and then I'm going to provide some details about the methods I used, a little bit of the non-pecuniary framework I used, which is systems thinking, and then some details about the assignment that this case goes along with. All right. So to begin, this was all part of a grant, a NIFA higher education grant that a group called the Global Education Lab was able to get in 2019. And they were recruiting people from all over the southeastern United States to learn about and prepare case studies. And what they wanted to do is they really wanted us to develop case studies that targeted natural disaster preparedness, right? So in Florida, obviously, we deal with hurricanes on a regular basis. So natural disasters is something that we are used to having. And what they wanted is they wanted some diverse disciplines to write case studies related to natural disasters. Well, so my friend Jada Thompson was at Tennessee at the time and realized that this is something we could do together because she's at Tennessee, I'm at Florida. Both of our institutions are taking place. I think actually Maria Texas A&M also was on the docket of people who could be involved in this. And so she's like, "Hey, you want to do this? We get to travel places and we get to develop a case study." And I said, "Why not?" But given that this was in 2019, 2020, as you can imagine, all of our travel plans got squashed. We didn't get to travel for the case study. However, we did write this article and we published it in ATR. So I don't think that that's a bad outcome overall. So according to the people who ran this, and by the way, they were agricultural education, so I trust their knowledge on pedagogical approaches. They say a case study is a story with an educational message. They say that it typically is discussion based, so you have it students read something and then they discuss it in the class time, and it encourages our students to learn by doing. It moves the classroom from a lecture-oriented space where people are kind of talking at you to a space where people are using higher order learning to think through a lot of technical or non-technical issues. So for me, this really provided an opportunity to provide context to complex problems. I like to tell my students, really, AggieCon is providing context to economic, business, etc. theories. So this is an opportunity to address complexity in economic problems. It's an opportunity to incorporate information from other disciplines. We don't talk a lot about anything besides benefits and costs, but there's a lot of reasons that people make decisions that don't have anything to do with a benefit cost analysis. And then it also helps us to think about how people make decisions under those competing objectives, right? So sometimes they might want to do something for a reason that doesn't make economic sense. And one of the big things is that theory is so full of jargon. You can spit out a theory at a student. You can be like, here's a definition. They don't get it. I promise they don't get it. I don't get it. Whenever I'm reading a textbook and I'm reading this, I'm like, no, I don't understand it. but when you go through a case and you're applying that technical jargon, it's much more helpful for internalizing those concepts fully, and then understanding why a system works the way it does. So, also according to the AEC folks, there are three types of case studies. All right. The first one is a decision or dilemma. You're trying to present problems and you are trying to get your students to come up with a answer. All right. There's a central character or group that has to make some sort of decision. And so the case study I'm talking about today, me and Jada's case study, is that case. We have a decision that needs to be made. You could also have appraisal of an issue. So another case study that I like to use in AETR, shout out to that, is I really like that the egg marketing case study there. I forget what it's called, but they go through like the cage-free labeling and things like that, and how it changes prices of eggs. So I use this to teach about how um, kind of labels matter to my students in classes. So it's more of a focused on like kind of what is the impact of this thing rather than making a decision. And then historical perspective. Another AETR case study is on like an OSHA kind of HR, labor, work. What do you call it? When someone gets hurt at work, there's a word. Occupational
Like
hazard?
workers' comps?
Yeah.
Yes, workers' comp, workers' comp. Yeah, something bad happens in a factory, right? What do you do? How do you prepare for that? And like, what went wrong? What did they not do that they should have done? So this historical perspective allows us to like question the way things that happen and question how a decision was made. We really thought about writing something like this for natural disasters. It would work very well, but we ended up deciding on a decision type case. But I think in our case, either of these styles would have been fine for what we were trying to achieve. Also, what is different about a case study compared to a problem set? Actually, Jason was talking at the beginning, we do problem sets all the time. What's the difference? The key difference here is the message, right? We have a story. It doesn't read like a textbook. It doesn't read like a problem solving set where you have to answer these questions one after the other. There's a conversational tone. You have details. You have uncertainty. You don't introduce every term within this umbrella of terms. You do the ones that are relevant to that case. And sometimes you don't even mention the ones that are relevant to that case. You leave it up to the reader, to the students to try to decide what is the relevant framework I should be thinking about. And so then that makes it so that it's much more like a story than like just a typical problem solving set. And so it's, I think, a bit more fun than problem solving sets. So, what was our decision-making process on writing this case study? So we're just two small girls, a small town girls from Arkansas. We go way back. We graduated from an Aggie Con in 2004 from the University of Arkansas. And then, we met up this summer at Rocky Mountains for our AAEA meeting. Yay! We were thinking, what do we know about? Well, we know about natural disasters. We know about poultry. So Jada is a poultry economist. We know a little bit about, I'm an environmental economist. So I think about environmental problems and decision making, some benefit cost analysis and things like that. So what we decided to do is we decided we should write a case study that is situated in where we're from, which is in Northwest Arkansas. And then, of course, contextualized in this natural disaster space. So this is my front yard whenever we had a ice storm in 2009. And you know how much advanced warning I had on this ice storm? None, right? It just started raining and then it started icing, and next thing you know, I'm trapped in my house and I don't have power for an entire week. I love Florida because I moved here and everyone's like, "Oh, hurricanes." And I'm like, "Wait, you have a whole week to prepare for a hurricane?" Like, we had hours to prepare for an ice storm and we couldn't even go anywhere. And then also tornadoes, you know how much we got zero prep time on those babies, right? So we are definitely have experienced a natural disaster or 12 in our lifetimes that have had tremendous impacts on our state, tremendous impacts on agriculture. So for us, we're like, okay, poultry farming, natural disaster, tornado makes a lot of sense. Let's write about that. And so that kind of framed our story, which is what we were going for in our case study. Now, you might have guessed we're good students, right? We're trying to meet every single requirement that POLA is throwing at us. So they're saying here for this preparing organizational leaders in agriculture, you've got to have a instructor's guide, you've got to have a case study, you've got to have a summative assessment, and you need to incorporate these things here, these leadership frames. All right. And we don't know anything necessarily about leadership frames prior to this activity, but we're like, okay, we that seems doable. And bonus, these are all the things that are required to publish an AETR. So that fits. That's what we're going to do. We're going to write a case study that's publishable and that meets all of these requirements. So meet Henrietta Bacon. Isn't she adorable? Well, this is AI's version of what Henrietta Bacon would look like. I can give you the prompt if you want for what I put in here to get out Henrietta Bacon. I don't think this was exactly what we were looking for, but you get the idea. This lovely character. She's on an Arkansas farm. She's got all these advanced poultry systems, and she wants to know should she rebuild her poultry house after it was destroyed by a tornado. And not only that, she had experienced tornadoes in the past, so she was kind of dealing with this being kind of a repeat problem, if you will. So she wanted to decide, did she want to rebuild? In our teaching context, we both taught capstone management classes. So much fun. We want people to be able to make decisions based on a lot of information. So this works out perfectly. A benefit cost analysis under risk seems ideal. We can and should take into account the time value of money. We're economists after all. And then when we were writing this case, we wanted it to be basically to where Henrietta would be somewhat indifferent financially between the two options, which is how we wrote the case. In addition, we wanted to take into account these things that Polo was interested in. So we wanted to take into account natural disasters, which include stress, right? Mental health issues. That's an important one. Leadership frames. So what kind of leader do we have here in Henrietta Bacon, and what kind of decision might she make given her leadership style? Succession planning. We wrote it so that her daughter was getting a degree in poultry science. So much fun. Maybe she could take over the farm. And then regional economy. So, growing up in this area, we saw the effects of the poultry industry being a very cyclical one. So, around Thanksgiving, everyone was overemployed. Come February, everyone's underemployed, right? Because that poultry cycle, especially for turkeys, it works like that, right? So we were wanting to take into account the fact that this woman is hiring people and they depend on her for their livelihood. And then, of course, industrial organization. So you can't talk about poultry farming without talking about vertical integration and talking about these large poultry processing firms. We didn't name the poultry processor, but of course we had one in mind as we were thinking through this case, given our background. So that's the background in that. Then, in addition, I was starting to teach my students in my capstone management class about systems thinking. So, this is a nice method for tackling wicked problems. I use this textbook, Flock, Not Clock, Design, Align, and Lead to Achieve Your Vision, which basically is systems leadership um, in a textbook. And so it's nice because it allows people to think about what things might impact a decision or a system or a process or a thing. And so it uses this method of DSRP, where D is distinction. So there can be an identity and another identity, such as a business versus an industry. These are two different things. So making distinctions important. Systems, part and whole. Again, maybe you have a business, and then within that business, you have an HR component. Maybe you have a engineering component. Maybe you have a sales component, right? So parts and whole. Action and reaction relationships. So, how do businesses interact with each other, for example? And then, of course, perspectives, consumers being an important perspective, but also in a lot of cases, people within a firm having a very important role in what happens. So, this is the method. So, within systems thinking, there's actually an approach to breaking down a problem into DSRP, so into distinctions, systems, relationships, and perspectives. And there is a systems thinking software out there called Plectica. And so In my class, I have students model complex problems using Plectica. So in this case study, I had them model the decision of to rebuild or not to rebuild for Henrietta Bacon. And so I had them start from a template here. And again, like this may not be a approach that you've used in your class, not a big deal. You don't have to use it exactly as I did. But I gave them a lot of examples in class, and I gave them this template to make it fairly straightforward for them to go through and think through this problem of rebuilding or not rebuilding using systems thinking. So then this is, for example, a diagram that I came up with that I would think would be a key for this assignment. So I have the rebuild option. If she rebuilds her poultry houses, she has new technology, skilled operators, and she has regulations that she is working with. This provides an opportunity for her to poultry farm with a contract with the integrator. And then, of course, chicks growing and then delivering those to processor. And all of this is contingent on various perspectives, right? So natural disasters, economy, etc. So if you can see, this is really nice because I have distinctions. I have new poultry houses, which is separate from poultry farming. These are distinct parts of a system, and the system here would be the rebuild system. But you also have a family that is a system itself. And then I have relationships. The poultry houses provide an opportunity to poultry farm. Without houses, you can't poultry farm. Makes sense. And then perspectives as well. So they can be ideas like regional economy or individuals like Henrietta's husband or daughter or son, etc. So the case study decision at the end of the day, and this is the do not rebuild scenario where they're looking at the alternative, which is just doing livestock. This would be a situation where they're financially indifferent. 59,000 versus 55,000 in today's dollars is not that different from each other, at least not enough to matter too much. I will say students were able to use Plectica to create the diagrams and capture the complexity of the system, and their diagrams looked very similar to the ones that I came up with. So I think that was good. The in-class discussions were very rich. I loved hearing my students be like, they were talking about the family, they were talking about Henrietta and Henrietta's daughter and vertical integration and market power in such a fun way, right? You don't get to see that very much. So it was really neat. They were very supportive of the character we built. They were concerned about the community, the farm workers who depend on Henrietta for income. And they were also integrating this leadership component. So Henrietta herself was more of a human resources or symbolic frame. And so a lot of people were taking that into account and using it to support a not a rebuild decision. So here they were thinking, okay, she should rebuild because she wants to keep the farm, right? Or not rebuild because risk is traumatic and, kind of at some point we need to move on for the health of the family. So thinking about those things. So all of this is to say this case that I developed was one that had students grapple with complex issues and had them grapple with family, which is not typically probably part of our regular Ag Econ classes, and had them grapple with leadership, which I don't know how many of you guys teach the leadership frames, but I never did before doing this case study. So it had us integrate some leadership into it. Market structure, right? Some IO stuff in here that we were able to incorporate. Natural disasters, mental health, students actually really enjoy talking about mental health and they appreciate that, but probably not part of a typical Ag Econ curriculum. And then, of course, complex adaptive systems. So my entire class is based in systems thinking. So they're used to thinking about businesses and organizations as complex adaptive systems. But it's not as complicated as you might think because at the end of the day, they were able to come up with a solution that made sense based on the facts of the case. And I really do think that we still stayed true to our field by keeping those Ag Econ components within our case study. So that's what I had for you guys today. If you have any questions, you can send them my way. You can always reach out and I'll provide anything. Actually, I think you can request all the teaching notes from AETR already. But, happy to help if you guys have any questions.
So we'll save questions till the end. I'm going to move to Hannah. So Hannah Shear is going to present on teaching with case studies in farm and agribusiness management. And so I will turn it over to.
Okay, my Wi-Fi is being super slow, or my internet's not really Wi-Fi, but can you all see my screen in normal view? Okay, I got some thumbs up. Excellent. Yeah, I was a little laggy with Misty's presentation, so hopefully we can get through mine here. But Misty set it up really well, talking about like the framework of case studies, and then walked through a really cool example that she done with Jada. I'm gonna talk more about how I utilize them in the classroom, just because I've written a couple case studies more with the farm management and now the Food Distribution Research Society. So it's interesting. I've kind of had to crash course learn some of these frameworks on how to write one. So I'm also learning in this session while presenting as well. But in this section, I'm going to talk about how I use it in my farm and agribusiness management course here at Oklahoma State. I'm not going to give you the big spiel about who I am, but I do have a heavy teaching appointment here. And I teach a range from freshman to senior level courses. But the one I'm talking about today, where I use most of my case studies, is that junior level class, where I'm really starting to try to get them to do a higher level of learning and not just, definitions and the basic kind of lower level memorization learning that I'm doing in my freshman level courses. I also have the experience doing case studies having been a graduate student, and I found that I learned so much more that I remember having participated in case studies, whether that was through AAEA's case study competition, IFAMA's competition, as well as organizations like FDRS. So that's why I really try to work hard to incorporate them into my courses, just because I do think so much learning can come from that. Specifically, I really like the kind of active learning. Students get to engage with realistic scenarios. And I say this so often of it's the way we teach our classes, we give them all the information, right? We give them all the numbers and then we're do this calculation. And so there's very little thinking necessarily that goes on at that higher level. And so just finding ways that we can get them to be active in the learning process, I'm always interested in doing, along with their kind of critical thinking skills. Um, I want to have students start to recognize the concepts that I'm teaching in class in a real world scenario. We're taught as teachers to be very organized in how we structure our classes. And we have sections and titles for everything. So the students know exactly what they're learning when, right? Okay, this is the financial benchmarking chapter. This is the investment chapter. This is the whatever chapter. But no one's necessarily telling you that when you're in the real world or your boss is coming to you with that. They're not like, oh, this is definitely a game theory question that we need to answer, or a risk management question. No one's telling you that. So finding ways to introduce them to these case studies where they have to identify the problem, and kind of figure out, well, what is the actual issue? And that is a skill we hear over and over again from the industry, oh, your students know how to do these calculations and stuff, but that critical thinking component, that problem identification, is where we really would like to see students excel. The other thing I really enjoy about case studies is there's not necessarily one clear answer. And I really enjoy, I know what I think the answer is, and teaching notes provide some general guidance, but I really enjoy seeing what the students come up with on their own. So I enjoy that gives the students some flexibility to come up with creative solutions that may not just be oh, the answer was 2 and I got it wrong. But on the flip side of that, why I don't like case studies, and you have to take a lot of effort and time, or at least I find that I do, to incorporate them into my class effectively, is that they can be time consuming. So, case studies are several pages long. They're a big story, right? Misty was talking about how they're a story, and Well, it takes time for students to read them, and you don't want them to just read it. And we know sometimes getting students to read anything is like pulling teeth, but getting students to read it and digest it and think about it and reflect on it, it takes time for the students. It also takes a lot of time for me as the teacher to find case studies that are going to actually help me apply the concepts I'm teaching them on the theory side. It'd be great to be able to use a case study for every single applied concept I'd like to teach them and have one for every single section of my class. I don't. But that is kind of where I'd like to end up. So it can be time consuming to do that. But then also it's harder sometimes to grade sometimes because there is not one clear answer. So that's where I really try to focus on, okay, well, what strategy did the students use to reach their answer? So again, it's giving them some flexibility on the learning process of how did you walk through the decision or the dilemma. But it does sometimes make it harder to grade and because it's a lot easier to mark an answer as either right or wrong if the answer was supposed to be two, as opposed to a case study analysis. So where do I get them? Well, there's lots of places to go get them. Obviously, Misty's already mentioned AETR. IFAMA has their own case study database as well. Purdue has lots of ones for farm management and agribusinesses. FAPSI, which is here on our campus here at OSU, they work with industry companies and they do consulting, and they have lots of smaller case studies that we can use straight here from that center. I've also found Harvard Business School has a whole database of case studies as well. And I never would have thought of Harvard of having a lot of ag-based ones, but they do. They have a large a really big kind of agricultural based one. So a precision ag one from Deere and Company, and then they've also got some brewing things that are in their database as well. So you can get them all over the place, but one of my other favorite things that I like to do now is write my own. Now mine are not, a big part of it, like a giant publication, and they've not gotten into AETR. I've not submitted them yet, but I need to go back and start thinking about that, especially as I kind of write them to meet my course objectives. But the help of AI, case studies, obviously the ones you see here are longer. They're going to be 10 to 12 pages. They give lots of background, but you can also do kind of like some scenarios is what I call them. So they're kind of shorter case studies where it still tells a story and gives students to have like an applied, identify the problem, but it's not as large of one that might end up actually getting published. But AI can really help you do that. I mean, not just come up with pictures like Misty used for Henrietta, but it's a really useful tool. I tell it, I want to teach a junior level farm management class, a case study that's going to help them understand, estate planning. I'd like the farm to be this, and I give it some parameters, and it writes a really cool story for me. And then I just kind of plug in some numbers on some things as needed, and we've got a pretty good 2-page case study that's really digestible in a small amount of time, but gets my learning objective across better than just draw out the decision tree for this problem. So again, how I try to make it work and easy, and every year I change a little bit how I do it, trying to make it function easier in the classroom. But I always try to give the case study at least a week ahead of time for our students. That way they can read it once and then they're going to kind of forget about it. And then I want them to read it again and then kind of ruminate on it. So at minimum a week. I also will randomly assign that they have to turn in their notes, and they don't know when I'm going to ask for their notes on the case study. So they just have to risk it and hope that they did it the time I'm going to ask for it, the time or multiple times I asked for it. But they have to take notes, highlight things, ask questions, make notes. I give them kind of a guided reading thing of like, well, what data would you want in addition to this? What problems do you see? What course terminology or content do you directly see this maybe relating to? And they have to turn that in just whenever I ask for it. The other thing that I have realized I need to do a better job at doing is kind of chunking the case study and how I utilize it in the class. My class is either an hour 15 or 50 minutes, and there's no way you can't get through the whole thing in one class period. And despite my greatest efforts to think I can jam it in, it's actually way more effective to spread it out across and to do both in class and outside of class work on the case study. But I found that the in-class discussions are the most where I see the most learning coming from. But with that being said, the group discussions, group work, students hate it. Faculty sometimes dread grading it and making students work together because they don't want to hear the drama and blah, 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 blah. But it's, again, what industry says repeatedly that they want students to know how to do: manage conflict management, communication between, different styles of people who communicate differently. So I purposely, I assign groups. I don't let you pick your friends in my class. I go through a detailed student survey at the beginning of the semester, and I use that to sort students into groups so that we've got a mix of genders, whether they're from a production ag background or not, what their major is, because my course has a range of plant and soil, animal science, and ag business majors, along with specialties. So some of them may be from crop or livestock background. So I always try to make sure what I call them family farms, each group has a livestock person, a crop person, and then a mixture of other things as well. Because I want to make sure that the students are reflecting on how they do in a group, as well as how others do in a group. They have to evaluate one another on a scorecard. Now they evaluate each other, but I'm the one that actually does the score. And then students also do a self eval, which I find to be the most beneficial, because they'll give themselves a grade. And you see that a lot of students are really honest. They're like, yeah, I didn't do anything this week for my group. So I was a pretty bad group member. And I've never assigned a score that a student has come back to me and been mad about, or thought that their group, I've never had someone come to me and be like, oh, my group was mean to me. Any grade I gave based off of what I saw in the classroom and on the scores, students seem to agree with based on their self eval as well. This is just an example of the eval form. So they get to review themselves, they get to write down the members, review them, and then there's some open-ended questions that they have to answer as well. I also ask them some follow-up questions about individual members, like what did this member do really well? What did this member not do really well? Or where could they improve? And then I kind of synthesize that feedback and give it to each of the members so that there's actual potential room for improvement. And the students aren't just every other week eviscerating each other on a scorecard. You actually get some feedback for improvement. The other thing I've learned over time is you don't necessarily need to look for multiple case studies. Obviously, when people are writing case studies, they have an original objective or purpose or focus that they're writing about, or that they're trying to have students utilize in the case study. But again, if you're wanting students to really think about it and mull over something for a while, finding a way to use one case study maybe in multiple ways that it wasn't originally intended. So in agribusiness or farm management, we do a lot of the stuff with, identifying sources of risks, SWOT analysis, strategic growth, decisions, things like that. So you can do those even though they weren't necessarily the purpose of the case. Just have the students read through the case study and identify potential sources of risk for whatever's happening in the case. A lot of case studies have, investment analysis or financial analysis. So like, Henrietta is going to go through the numbers, like write out the cost of the rebuild, the whatever, the opportunity cost she's giving up, things like that. So even though that case was about, X, I can also kind of project my own objectives into the case study so that the students can really get familiar with the problem and they've thought about it slightly more in depth than just every week there's a new case study, because that's a lot for students. The other thing I've really come to enjoy here at OSU that I now use back into my farm and agribusiness management, we have a lot of honor students who have to do honors projects within their classes. And so I offer as one of the options for those honor students to do if they want to write their own case study. So some do a series of small scenarios that they just kind of build on their own, and they have to provide like the solution to it as well. But what's really cool is because here at OSU, we have lots of students from production ag background from all over the United States. So I've got students from Maine, dairies in Maine, to people that grow cherries and almonds in California. So I don't know anything about cherries, right? But this honor student, they're the largest cherry producer from the state of California. And I'm like, well, that's a plot twist. Do you want to write a case study? And he was like, absolutely. So that was his honors project. And he's so into it, right? Because it's his personal operation, and that was his grade. And then I also asked him, like, would you be okay with us using this in class? And he was like, absolutely. So, and he even threw out farm financials, and so I changed some of them before we used it in class the next semester. But um, it also gave a chance because, it is Oklahoma and all we do is wheat and cattle most of the time, but my classroom has students that are from all over. So it allows me to have kind of a wider breadth and depth of options to use for my students, which is really fun. Plus, I didn't really have to do all the work, which is even better. So that's it. Jason said we're going to save questions and discussion until the end. So that's just my contact information. If you have any questions, I'm always happy to share my case studies. The ones I've written, like that are unofficial, they're not published, but I'm always happy to share those because people have shared them with me as well.
Thank you, Hannah. So our next presenter is Maria Bompasadu and Texas A&M. So just started. So I'll pass it to Maria.
Yeah, let me see if I'll do this correct. So please give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Should be a wonderful burgundy right now. So, and maybe this is gonna work or it might change into the other one. So moving things around. So I'm glad I'm in this session and thank you for being here. I hope this is gonna be a valuable resource for when you go back and other think of a course that needs to have a case study or write a case study. The ladies have been amazing. Some of the things that I'm gonna say might be a little repetitive, so maybe that is something for you to take note and say, if one person talks about it, I might take a little bit closer look if I'm interested. If three of the four talk about it, that might be something that they have accumulated for years and years doing this. So we're here in a sense, not necessarily to share our wisdom, but also help you navigate teaching because it's not always rainbows and unicorns. Sometimes it is. So my presentation has a little bit of more of an approach. Okay, now you're thinking of incorporating case studies. How should you go about it? I'm using my capstone class that I was offering at LSU for a couple of years as my base. So keep all the information that you think is relevant and think it with that perspective. Like I don't necessarily need to start using case studies, but if I have, like, where do I start? So that's my perspective. You're gonna get some context, so you're gonna see a little bit what I'm using. And I will close with some parting words. So putting everybody on the same page. Misty talked about capstone courses. Hannah talked about capstone courses. I think it's a term that is pretty familiar. We're pretty familiar. It's pretty common. Sometimes people call it a capstone class. Others they call it capstone projects. Bottom line, we're looking at upper level courses and curricula, 4,000 level, typically offered at the very last semester of some of a student's program of study. We would like that to happen. Sometimes program of studies do not work as well as we would like. But the reason is that those classes are a little bit unique. Not necessarily we're going to offer new information. We'd like to see students demonstrating expertise, interest in areas of studies. So that might mean skills that they bring, knowledge that they carry over from other classes, and their personal interests. I've seen capstone courses run in like professors will use books. They might read specific reading assignments, case studies, and there might be just industry-related projects. So my focus is just on case studies in here. So if Misty and Hannah have not convinced you why you should use a case study, I must try harder and say, hey, I hope it makes clear that they offer content flexibility. I used to say you don't need to be an expert in what you're working on, but if you want to make your class relevant and you want to cater to your students, then you might need to get out of your comfort zones. And case study can offer that solution to you. Both presenters before me highlighted the practical application. The other thing that I would like to mention is that they can be tailored to not only for content, so prerequisites. What do I care about my students knowing? What emphasis do I like to put? What is the composition of my class? Do I have students going back into farming? Do I have people interested in the ag business? Or sometimes do I have students that do not even know what they are in this ag degree that we're offering? In any case, we like to see them being used as a tool that is offer uh, a way for students to engage in more creative problem solving. We used to say critical thinking, but now we're jumping into problem solving with case studies and peer learning, which to me that's really important. So my approach, my capstone course was put in place to kind of like bridge some areas that we don't tackle a lot. So it had to do with marketing and management and policy. Some departments, they might have a more business oriented curriculum, some might not. So this class was there to kind of like provide a little bit more business oriented skills. I've used case studies as an illustrative tool. So basically, it is a way for students to become familiar with the topic. So it's not a case study that students are going to focus on a specific uh, industry, collect data on it, create reports, and then move on to the same thing for another topic. And we had a presentation with Miss Day, and I think, yeah, Jason, if I'm not mistaken, not the one who's on the call right now, that we talked about different case studies. So we provided some more information about what different types of case studies you might see. Now, again, as I said, I'm tackling this presentation from a person who is interested in using case studies. So I need to have some structure on how I'm thinking. So I'm going to pick topics that come from different areas. And I'm going to challenge myself and the students to get more comfortable in topics that are not used to. When I first started working on this class, I think I was brutal. I think I had a case study every week. You can imagine how great the comments that I received were in the evaluations. There is no structure. This is not cohesive. We jump from one story to another. I don't see transferability of the things that we've been taught. I thought I knew what was a SWOT, but now I have no idea what that is. And you lose them. You don't want that to happen. The case studies and the capstone classes, they have this flexibility for me that you get feedback and you value input differently from students because it's not a course that you have to offer that has specific course deliverables that other courses are built upon. And you need for sure to use every week in a prescribed fashion, if that makes sense. Think of calculus, if that doesn't make sense that I'm saying. Like if you don't have Calc 1 cover up to chapter 11, for example, you cannot start Calc 2. Well, the capstone courses, you have more freedom. But I try to put a structure, like every industry that I'm using is a module on its own. Those are some of the examples and topics that I've used. We don't do co-ops. We didn't do it at LSU. So that was a great way for me to bring some expertise that I thought I had when I was doing my graduate work at University of Florida, but focusing on marketing, a topic that I'm not an expert. And then show them how things can change when you look at regions that might be just a state or a couple of states to a whole island that is focusing on kiwi production in New Zealand, and they're still working on a co-op side. But instead of doing again marketing, I'll do production, and then I'll link it with global supply and strategic planning because New Zealand has a really interesting industry for kiwis if you're not familiar with it. And then on each one that I introduce, I'll add something new. So if I do John Deere, I'm not going to do the machinery, I'm going to do more digital ag, but I'm going to keep things that worked in the production side or the machinery side when it comes to client segmentation. So students get something new, hopefully, but it's not a theory that I have to spend a lecture over it. Now, putting my teacher's hat on, we need objectives. Call it course objectives, call it learning objectives, call it student objectives. They're mandated now. And this has been kind of like a change that we've seen the last 10 years. So if if you notice, like, why do they even talk about learning objectives? I thought that was like an like we've used to know about learning objectives because some people are old, basically, and we didn't have student objectives, and then we have to learn about how to form properly teaching objectives and all that. So I use the case studies as a way to progress with not only the task and the tools that I'm using, but also with my learning objectives. So if I'm kind of like brutal and I split my course in two halves, the first half will be more task-oriented, tool-oriented. I want everybody to be familiar with what they're doing. And I keep it basic, like identify the goal of the agribusiness, think about market structure. So that's where they bring in the micro. That's going to be the price analysis type of background they bring. But the last half of the class will be on industry analysis. So we're going to talk about HR. We're going to talk about decision making. We're going to talk about how the industry is structured, the line of command, and so on. And their focus is not to just do a market analysis and say, okay, now we're dealing with Kiwis. Let's see who is my competition. Are you familiar with Porter's Five Forces? If that rings a bell, that is something that you have students working on existing rivals and suppliers and buyers and new entrants, which they do that in 1 and 2, but now they should do all of that, and they are consultants. They need to make the decisions. The case studies, as Hannah mentioned, does not necessarily have to be a standalone that they work on. It's just like they fit the purpose of the class. So I might have a case study because they have a really good history and background about the industry. I might have another one that talks about the marketing side. I might have another one that talks about the policy side, and they just have to synthesize information. So what is my role? If I do my job correctly, I am a facilitator, but I'm also the person who is setting expectations, and that is going to be difficult when you have a class that is based on discussion. As I said, this is not something that we build upon teaching new theories or tools per se. We like introduction of tools and theories, but they need to work out on a problem. So I split in through main chunks my class. The first one is fully guided. So the first 1 or 2 case studies, I'm there. I'm doing the presentation, I'm giving the industry report, I take them through IBIS World, other data banks that they can find information. I refresh their memory about SWOT and Porter's Five Forces. I rely on research for the Porter's Five Forces, and I also try to use case studies that are not using Porter's Five Forces so well, in a sense. So I'm just trying to trigger them and make them uncomfortable as much as I can, because they need to start thinking that this is a tool that is not used only for marketing, but you can break the boundaries of that box and use it in management decisions and so on. For the second third, I am a facilitator. So now they have the tools, they have templates, they know how to work on writing to a degree, but now they're alone a little bit more. So they have to work on their soft skills. They're going to be presentations. They have to be cold called to give a report or a slide with 3 bullet points that they discussed on a specific topic. And at the end, the closure of the module will be a technical writing, which tables of contents, directions, like I have some examples that I can share with you. I don't leave anything not guided yet. And trust me, I learned that the hard way, because I thought, oh, I'm going to show you 1 or 2 case studies and then you're on your own. I think they suffer sometimes from short-term memory, especially when they're senior, like year, senioritis is willing, they're worried about interviews. They just need more structure. And the last third, I'm like, okay, I guide you as best as I can. If I did my job well, now it's also part of my self-assessment, your hands off. So I'm the client. And Hannah mentioned about those competition formats, the NAMA, the FDRS, the IFAMA. Students, if you're not familiar, are given a case study, best case scenario, a month before, where they get to have like minimal information. I time my during spring break, because the main presentation is going to happen at the end of the semester. And then they are given general info. I give a presentation as the client. I give them the topic and the task they're assigned. And then I have closer to their presentation a follow-up with Q&A. So that's my role. Like fully guided facilitator and then client. I give you a task, I pay you in a sense, you deliver. So let's talk about the other counterpart, the students. So what do they expect? A lot of them will tell you that they were not prepared for a class like that. They were comfortable with a lecture-based course. Some projects and some in-class activity will do great. They also need clear answers to all assignments. I cannot emphasize, like when Hannah was going through the slides, I wanted to highlight that, like, or prescribed solutions. What do they see and what they get is different. And Misty and Hannah, like, they made that case really clear. You have diverse method of delivery. So the case study can be where I start, but then they're going to see industry videos, marketing campaigns, industry reports, and so on. They'll have to get used to the no single solution or answer. And at the end, they're going to see that how well they like the class, how well they cope with the material, how comfortable they feel depends on their effort, how well they structure discussions as groups, and how they cooperate with peers. Because that's another thing that we struggle. Not everybody is comfortable working on a group. They prefer to be alone, but this class is not meant for that. And the case study is not meant for that. You can have an individual component, but then you always come back into think per share type of thing or like group assessments. So they don't mind, they don't like me the first month. And actually, when I started my introduction to the class, my name is Maria Babasidu. They've seen me in ag finance that has so much structure, like exams, lectures, assignments. I'm like, forget what you knew about me. I have a dual person, like it's my alter ego. I'm gonna make your life miserable. I'm gonna play the devil's advocate. You're on your own. Prepare not to feel comfortable. And at the beginning, they felt like shocked, but then they understood. And with case studies, you work really closely with the students in the group, so you get a different type of feedback. So they cooperate more and they get out of their comfort zone and they're not as frustrated as they first started. But they are not happy at the first couple of weeks. A lot of unknowns, a lot of like moving components. Now, what do I expect for them? So they start working in groups from week 2. Hannah made a comment about how you can form groups. I started doing more of an activity with let's identify your strengths and weaknesses. For some, and cohort by cohort, surprisingly, they are so different. So it's a way for me to get to know them. At one year, I had everybody wanted to do marketing. Guess what? Their marketing campaigns were not as great. I hope at least that was a lesson they learned. So they're not going to go into marketing and they're going to be more pragmatic. But if they are going into marketing, they know what to expect. Lately, they're into a lot of leadership roles, which is great. They have high standards, so I have high expectations. It works. But I want to see like they can be groups formed on GPA, on how well they cope with things. You need a diverse group of students, not only in terms of like their background, but also what skill sets they have. So I want a data-driven person. I want a person who is not afraid to talk and stand up and speak for the whole group. I want a person who is shy. I want a person who also does all the work at the background, but then comes and glues everybody in the group together because he's the mediator in the group. And I changed them up. So the first 2 case studies, they stick together, they learn, their peers. The good thing with the capstone class, they've known each other for a while. They might have not worked together as much. The next 2 groups, I switch them again. The only group that I allow them to form their own group is when they act as the consultant, because they need to work as best as possible. So in the fully guided case studies, they will have individual work and they will have class work. And for me, I found that that was really important, especially with students not feeling comfortable relying on others and groups for their grade. So I'm trying to have a grade component that can be as self or independent. So like so they know what they get out. So the effort they put, the effort they see being assessed. But the in-class activities, if you ask me about points, you show up, you do the work. I grade you on completion. I don't grade you on correctness because I don't expect you to be correct. I expect you to have a couple of correct answers, but millions incorrect answers. Because my role is for you to guide you on how you should read the case study, understand the case study, understand the task, and so on. When I am as a facilitator, the group role assign are taking more and more effect. The group discussions, nobody leaves the room before they submit 3 bullet points about what they decided as their next task. Because with 5 or 6 case studies, you should expect I have a week and a half of good contact with them. And I prefer to teach on 2 days for 1 hour and 20 minutes because the 50-minute has been, by the time I refresh their memory, they're gone. And the consultant one is group presentation center. That is the majority of their assessment. They get feedback immediately after like I wrap up with the class. I make some notes. I make sure that I've worked with all the groups and see where they struggle. But my goal is to give them feedback within the day because I meet with them in 2 days and they need to know what they're working on. And they're real creative. What you see at the background is like ways that I can share feedback with Porter's 5 forces. So I'm like, group 1, put in 1 in this power. Group 2, put a 6. Are you out of your mind? What's going on? Like, talk about it. I'm trying them to do visuals as well as much as I can. They don't need to be pretty. I don't think what you see at the back here looks pretty, but at least it's not only thinking, but just put in on a piece of paper helps them kind of like solidify. Misty share another great resource they have. And then they get creative. This is the logo for the John Deere one. Our gift is what you need. Our gift is your need for their campaign. So what do my students say? Good class helped me gain confidence in talking in front of people. All of them are presenting one way or another, and they're sharing their work during the class, and all of them present during the presentations. This class made me change my thinking. We had to power through and figure out what we don't understand. At the beginning, I didn't know how to work on it by time. So given time, you can see that they get more familiar with your style. They get to know you. What is the expectation? But confusion is still there. I'm still gonna have at least one. I was confused. I don't know if it was her fault or my fault, but confusion still persisted. So I don't mind because that was a part of the deal, like to get out of the comfort zone. So some parting words. So again, if you're thinking of using case studies or if you want to do like a standalone case study course. So it's all about clarity, expectation, and the overall experience. So think what you like to accomplish. This is not a class that they need to learn things. It might not be the class they need to learn things. It might be a class that they get more comfortable with their soft skills. They get to work in groups. They get to own their mistakes. That's my biggest thing. Don't be afraid to put what you're present what you're thinking, but back it up. And you're not alone. Your students are great inputs and you have support mechanisms. So if you're interested, please look at university resources and any teaching academies that you can join. What can go wrong? You spend an hour extra. You might gain something that will help you move forward. But that's in the past. When you are in the class, be present. So observe your students and their interactions. Keep notes. It's hard, but try to make a note about what worked and what didn't. If they're happy, that means it works. If they talk too much, keep that as well. Maybe they have more free time, so they need to be challenged more with the assignment. Make sure that you adapt your course, but be consistent with the timelines of deliverables. All my case studies report were due on Friday at that day, at that time. They knew it. Or Sunday. Or if it is in the fall and your school is big on football, maybe Friday night is not the best deadline to set. Maybe you need to go Sunday. Maybe you need to go Monday morning. A lot of things that happen during the night. They have time, but keep it the same. And then explain, explain, explain. They don't get it. They're not in your head. You have to resonate with them. You have to explain the changes. You have to explain the progression of the tasks. And this is not a cohort of students that will work well if they say, oh, trust me, it's going to work. No, I don't think the trust me is going to work is good for a capstone. This is get the feedback, adjust, adapt, know of any changes, and understand. And then in the future, if things worked out well, great. If not, don't go and revamp the whole class. Be selective, okay? You cannot change everything. You put effort to begin with to use a course that has case studies. You selected those case studies for a reason. My advice, don't do kiwis for a month. I did that for 1 year. They are traumatized. They see Zespri now and they go away. So, or they see Zespri is like, this is the kiwi of preference. So I don't know how it's going to work. I'm not endorsing any of the companies that I put in the case studies, but students pick their favorites. Brainstorm of your favorite learning activities and brainstorm with them as well. They like to give feedback, those students. Consider the core design and the learning experience. That is something that is challenging more and more about uh, I don't know. I have so many things that I can think of, like content-wise, reading material, videos, podcasts, what works for them, distance learner versus not, in person, how many in-class activities they need, how many they need to be on their own. It is not as easy, but you'll figure it out. Maybe the first time was okay, second is getting better, third is a charm. And last but not least, because I have to preach to the choir, like think of your peers. Like if you try something and you like it, just share. It doesn't need to be a case study. It can be a teaching tip or a commentary, teaching methods, or present. That's what we're here for. This is an excellent resource, and I believe my time is up. But I'm happy as all to share resources and point you to the right and wrong direction as well. Try brainstorm. I'm gonna stop sharing and it's back to you, Jason. Thank you.
Cool. Well, I am going to share mine. There we go.
Did I take most of your time?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Mine is supposed to go short.
Misty is nodding.
Yes. Well, no, but mine was meant to go short, so I planned this. So obviously, I'm going to talk about writing and publishing teaching case studies. So I'm going to look at this from an editor's perspective as the editor of AETR. I personally have never written a case study. I think I've had an impact on how they're written in our profession a little bit. Just because as an editor and seeing that, and I want to give you some perspective on that because I think something that comes out is there's no one size fit all to these case studies, and that's also when you're going through the review process thinking of that. Some people think there are and there's not. And so you'll see some case studies pop up. Some are the authors. There's other ones that pop up in here. But I want to do this from an editor's perspective. I'm not going to go through why we do case studies. The other three presenters did a really good job at that. So what I want to talk about is doing a case study. I'm not going to spend a whole time here, but I do want to reiterate, and this is something not only case studies, it's any article we write on any topic, research, tell a story. And I think for the case studies, this is really interesting. Misty, Hannah, Marie, you all did a good job at kind of selling this in terms of that story is really what gets the students engaged, involved. And Misty, you did a good job in kind of indicating how that's done. I just put up two different case studies here that actually, like one teaches about the hemp industry and supply and demand, but it looks at it through 9 Days Wonder Farm. And then we have another one that looks at Renaissance Ag, which is a pasture box. And its main character is Brady Blackett, the head of the sales team at Renaissance Ag. And so you can tell a story from different perspectives, but not all the case studies go that route. There's these historical case studies, Misty, you brought up in these different types that have different foci. And so, but I like the story approach. It tends to provide some context and connection. It is a little less abstract, and it tends to be a lot more problem focused, which I think is easier to grasp onto. In terms of writing the teaching case study, that's a big one. For me, is telling the story, and we did a good job. It's really finding a problem to solve, and it's got to be really well defined. And this is something I've when I review case studies, I want a purpose statement in the case study, but it can be in the context of the story. That's where sometimes people think they have to put this statement in, and I'm like, no, it can be in the context of the story itself for the case. And somehow we mix in those learning objectives. And so even if it's in the context of, and this one was one that was done, it's an example from Red Stick Farms. Maria, this was yours. You wrote this in terms of the context of the story of what the characters needed to learn and how what they need to do. And so putting those learning objectives in, you can state them. That's what a lot of people do. We like to see that in ATR because it tells the students what they need and they're going to get out of this. But you can do that in the context of the story as well. And so the other one is when you do your problem solving, a big one is don't answer all the questions for a teaching case. You can put it in the teaching note, but for the teaching case itself, leave that. They need a problem to solve. If you solve it for them, then you question, is it more just a case example? And so I think that's what separates. And so you want to leave some of that out to have them tackle that problem. A big one that's come at the end, and I've seen this done in different ways. Have discussion questions. This is very wide open. So when you're writing a case and you're thinking about writing it, you're going to tell a story, you're going to provide information, you're going to set up this problem. You may even teach some of the tools they need to use within the case study, because a case study can teach a tool. We don't think of it that way, but it can. And when you get to the end, how do you set up what you want the students to do? Are they being hired as consultants? Are they acting as the characters and then going to go solve this problem, right? That can be done through discussion questions. It can be built throughout the case. But a nice way to end a case is somehow setting up that, like, what's the next step? And so trying to think of that. And a lot of our case studies have discussion questions at the end. But there's other ways to go through that. The other side of that too is we have a lot of cases that have interactive elements. So case studies are problem-based solving. They can be experiential. They can also be active. And I don't know that we think of case studies as active learning, but they can be that as well. And so there's so many ways you can engage with the case studies. And so commonly it's spreadsheets, worksheets, but we have one that was on hedonic price analysis, and it actually works through econometrics. And it actually not only just does the econometrics, but works through all the different issues you go into estimating these hedonic price models. And so it not only teaches you about this topic from a case study approach, it actually provides you this really cool data set and all of the issues you need to worry about. Hey, what's double log form? It does the elasticities and some of these topics. And so, but teaching it from that case study point of view. So you're teaching about econometrics while doing this. And I've used this in my data analysis course. It's a great data set, by the way. It's used tractor sales. And so another one that I'm still waiting for a case, and I've never written, I'm still waiting, and I know they exist, is one that does linear programming. Like you actually, and you can build different modules to teach it. What a great way to learn some of these new topics, especially starting off. And so that's just saying there's all these elements that go with it. It's not just the document. And that's where you request them from us when we send them. We do require, Misty kind of touched on this, we require a teaching note. We do outline in our submission to guidelines. So case studies are required to have a teaching note. And so even if you write to a journal and you have a case study, I think IFOMR does as well. But if you're writing a case study, you should have a teaching note. We kind of followed IFOMR's approach in setting this up because we really liked it. And these are the different elements that need to go in there. What is the purpose? What are your learning objectives? What are they going to be doing? What's the audience? So considering that, we have this 2 statements on the teaching statement, like how do I teach it? And then what are the activities? And we're very upfront. Please, we highly encourage, it's rare we publish case studies that have not been used. You need to run it in your class or have someone run it for you. Test it out. What goes wrong? Tell us about that. That's awesome to know. Maria, you brought that up with some of the comments. It's great to know, hey, here's the complex stuff where students struggle. And what you can do to get around and help them get more engaged in that case. We do have one for a research statement. It's not as common. We do have some case studies or articles that we've had that are international development that actually walk through actual natural or actually experimental designs to test actual treatments and stuff from a case perspective. I think we have one looking at home cooking and fuel sources and stuff. And so you can actually do that as well. You can do a case study from a research perspective as like a research project. And that one actually has data with the research treatment and how to actually econometrically estimate that. And then supplemental material. If you're using a spreadsheet, provide it. I think this was one of the things saying, hey, you can provide those materials to us. I'll also throw out here a call for, because we're redesigning, we're trying to figure out how. One thing, like Hannah was mentioning, we all have these things that I don't have the time to write up. Submit it to our database so people can download them. It's something we want to grow. We kind of need to rehash it. And so we need to start getting, for us to really start pushing that, we need to start actually getting submissions for it. And we do have the submission process for that. It's through our same webpage. Opportunities for publishing. Heck, I gave you one. We welcome you to submit your submissions to AETR. IFOMR takes them. There's the Case Journal. There's the Harvard Business. There are 2 or 3 actually case study journals. Does NACDA do case studies? So NACDA. So there are other outlets. I see them in our regional journals as well, depending on what the case is. I highly encourage people, if you're looking for outlets and you're not ready to publish, but you have a really good case, the GSS case study competition, we now partner with them. The cases that are submitted there, actually, we work with the committee and the authors to publish those now. And so we've published 2 of the GSS case studies to date. And so that's something that we're trying to do year in, year out. And so once the competition's done, we work on getting the case up to speed. We publish all the invited case studies to AAEA, another good way to kind of motivate for deadlines. And then I just opened this up for here. I didn't know what our audience would be. If you're working on a case and you want to submit it and you want to get a deadline, submit an abstract to me by September 30th. And we'll consider it for the case study and economic games special issue we have ongoing. So we're still accepting submissions like for that to be finally submitted, and you'll be on. I think the due date would be January 31st. So is what we're looking for. So we actually had 2 closing dates for that. And the cool thing is you can collect, if you just wrote it and you want to write it, and they can be short cases. You don't have to write these long cases. And I think it can be highly useful. And so Hannah mentioned she has a lot of short cases. I'm like, put them together or even submit one. I mean, I think you'd be surprised at how people would be like, ooh, a short case study, and really get into using that, because I don't have the time to spend 2 classes over one, right? And some, like I'm thinking for me for principles, The shorter ones are a lot better and easier to swallow for my freshmen. When you're publishing a case study, things you need to remember. And so what does a case study in ATR need? You need a teaching note. Things that are sometimes overlooked in teaching case studies. Think about if you do need to get IRB approval. If you are putting comments or documentation, it's survey data, that sometimes that stuff comes in depending on the case. Just kind of think through that so you have that done. The other one that is not as often, but we ask, if you actually have real companies, real individuals that you are referencing in your case study, or it's about a real individual, and we've had this, we would like to, as editors, we will ask if you've gotten permission. We will actually want to see the emails or some documentation. And for us, it's an ethical issue. We want to make sure that person has agreed because I'm publishing that. So I want to make sure the person or the company has agreed that they're all right with doing that. Another way to do it for an individual is make them a co-author. I'm fine with that. That way they can even edit because you probably partner with them to write the case study anyway. So that's something just to think about. Sometimes we don't always, because a lot of case studies are based on real life. And so just making sure if it's not hypothetical, you just get those permissions. It's good habit. I'm not saying it's gray whether you have to have it, but it's a good practice. And it helps keep everything above board, I think, long term. In terms of case study, we have 32 case studies to date in the journal. A lot of them have been heavily used. There's some here. I think Maria or Misty, yours is here. I've already shown. So we have some other ones here. The other thing I wanted to do is we're actually working on with our database, a case study page. So I just uploaded in the chat session an Excel file. And this Excel file actually has an Excel document that has case studies from AETR, GSS for the AEM, IFOMR, Review of Ag Econ. I think there should be a tab on Harvard Business. We tried to go through and pull those. And I think we went back, for some journals, we went back 15, 20 years. So it gives you a way to search them. We're trying to keep this list and update it every year. And so if you want a copy of it, it's right there. Download it, and then let me know what you think. Especially if we're missing stuff and sources saying, hey, you guys should go look at this source and pull. It'd be a nice list. And we have a similar one for economic games. In terms of why publish an AETR, because I think we're the only journal that tracks downloads and uses of case studies for authors. This just gives you a history. Our case studies are still one of our most downloaded article items in AETR. So this is just kind of showing you we send that information back to authors every year if you've had downloads. And so this year we're on track to actually hit a new record. And so, which is kind of cool. We were down a little bit last year, but we're up now based on trends. And that's all I have. That's kind of, I just wanted to hit main topics. And then I wanted to make sure we left enough time. There's about 10 minutes. And open it up to people with questions for any of the speakers, comments. If anyone's had an epiphany.
If no one else has questions, I have questions. What is the ideal number of case studies to do in a class? So like Maria was saying, like every week is way too much. I agree with that. The most I've ever done in any particular class is 2. So what do you guys think?
I've only ever used 3, but I use those 3 multiple times in the same class. So like they'll have read it once, but then we're going to use it for 3 or 4 different learning things. But yeah, I don't think you could do more than that, or at least I couldn't.
Yeah.
I'm basically doing four, and the fifth is on their own. So, but they're built like they build on each other. So I use like, Misty, if I'm not mistaken, you were saying that you're going like more detail on things. It's different if you have to do like net profit versus, oh, let's use produce five forces and then use it again and they become more comfortable. I the yeah, the every week one was brutal. The seven was too much. The four is my comfort zone because things happen. Like there might be travel, like we travel to conferences. They also travel. Then I don't know, like Louisiana is like
Hurricanes.
weather. What weather gets you before you have. So you need to budget some of that. And what I like to do is have a session that we just share. Like I don't cover anything new. We just do assess like assess the whole thing, like from why different groups evaluated things the different way, or what they needed to learn about that. So four is my kind of like magic number in a course like with that is not heavily in the nitty like details. Like I'm not creating a pro like a product and I need to guide them throughout the process. So
Caitlin, Graciela, Francis, Lynn, Matt, you all have any questions?
I have a question. So I want to first thank the organizers and all the presenters. I think this is a really informative session. My question is, do you have any suggestions on how we can do case studies in class if it's an online class, and even worse, an online asynchronous class? Thank you.
Oh boy, golly. I did case studies whenever we had the COVID year, but we were meeting synchronously.
Mhm.
Um,
How was the experience? Like, did it work well for an online class? Okay.
Yeah, so Hannah was talking about she requires her students to share annotations. I assign my case studies to read on perusal, so they have to annotate and read it and things like that. So they do that all offline on their own. And if they're in teams and you've coordinated, like Hannah was talking about, and I think Maria as well, they have teams for these case studies. You have them meet and then they can come up with a presentation that they record and then they submit either on a discussion or as an assignment itself. So it
Mhm.
is possible, like like a game, like several of my peers use simulation games, and I think that they do that online asynchronously. So I don't think it would be all that different from that.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I do think you miss out on the rich classroom discussion. You might want to think about having a couple of synchronous sessions that you offer that people come and discuss the case study. And
Mhm.
I bet students would show up.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for the advice.
Hmm.
I haven't done it online. Like, well, no, I, 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 it did. Like one of them, it was when I first started. I started with COVID after, so I was not ready for it to transition into discussion boards, and that's what helped me. But it wasn't the same experience. I'm not saying it cannot be done, but it requires a different level of handling the content, uh, breaking down the activities and where you need to put effort. Um, that's why I said like check and see if the university that you're working with or like even the college at the college level, they have some resources that might help you and guide you on that. Um, there might be templates that you can use that are built in into whatever you're using, either that is Canva, Moodle, or you name it, like the system that you're using. I don't have like a better answer for you. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah, I
thank you.
think
Something that we can work on.
Hannah uses Packback, which might be discussion, an opportunity to use discussion in something like this. I think Packback combined, or Packback can kind of replace perusal to some extent. So, there's definitely some software that you might consider.
Mhm. Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
My last question before we go, Jason, on this September 30th deadline, as if I have time, I'm teaching 4 classes this fall. I don't even know what I'm doing with my life. But what do you mean economic games? My honor student
Yes.
is writing a case study right now for her honors project over her family farm, and they're engaging in a lot of conservation programs, which is really fascinating. And so you're thinking like Prisoner's Dilemma and those kinds of games, right?
No, these are classroom games or
Oh,
case studies. Yeah, we're trying to we wanted to put out a more general call for keeping the development of that active learning and then problem-based experiential learning. So we're thinking teaching case studies and classroom games, which I use a lot. I
okay.
still need to publish mine, and I've never.
So it's not
I
like a
hand it out to
combination.
people. Yeah, like I mean, we've developed
Okay.
a cooperative game. I have a supply chain game. We do a redeveloped production game that because I teach my principles with games. So I do simulation and games, but all of mine are hands-on. I don't use computer.
Yeah.
So which especially with AI, I want more hands-on in class data, hand packets. Yeah.
And the ultimate drafts for that special issue are, I'm guessing, due December, January?
January 31st. So our first
Okay.
deadline was July 31st, if people could, and then January 31st.
That was yeah, we
We
just
had two
submitted one.
because one was if people had new stuff and they needed time to test it out, and
Okay.
so we kind of did a double deadline.